Astrology and current events. Let us take a look back at past events in Kenya when Mars was retrograde in Cancer. December 4, 1945 to February 21, 1946. Kenya was still under British colonial rule. This period was marked by increased political mobilization and social changes as African nationalist movements began to take shape. Some key developments include: 1. Post-World War II context. World War II had ended in 1945, and the impact was still being felt in Kenya. Many soldiers who had served in the British Army returned home with heightened political awareness and a sense of injustice due to the discrimination they faced in war. There was a growing demand for greater rights and political representation for Africans, who had been marginalized in the colonial system. 2. Rise of African nationalism. The end of World War II fueled nationalist sentiments and a push for self-determination across many British colonies. During this time, African political groups started organizing and voicing their demands more assertively. In 1944, the Kenya African Union had been formed under a different name until renamed in 1946, aiming to address the grievances of the African population. By late 1945, KAU was expanding its influence among the African communities, advocating for land rights, labor rights, and political representation. 3. Labor unrest and strikes. In this period, there were a series of labor strikes and protests. Africans were demanding better wages and working conditions, as well as protesting against racial discrimination in employment. The December 1945 strike by African workers in Nairobi, primarily in the transport sector, highlighted the growing discontent among urban workers and the inadequacies of the colonial administration in addressing labor issues. 4. Land and economic grievances. Land remained a central issue, as the White Highlands fertile areas reserved for European settlers were closed off to African ownership and use, causing significant resentment among the indigenous population. The end of the war also brought economic challenges faced by African communities. 5. Political activism. Activists like Harry Thuku and other emerging leaders started to mobilize public opinion. This period laid the groundwork for the formation of more organized nationalist movements that would later culminate in the Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s.
December 12, 1977 to March 2, 1978. Kenya experienced a period of political stability under President Jomo Kenyatta, but there were significant political undercurrents and notable events. 1. Ban on the Kenya African Union, KAU. In December 1977, Kenyatta's government officially banned the Kenya African Union associated with the Mau Mau movement. Although KAU had long been inactive, the ban was symbolic and signaled the government's intention. 2. The decline of the East African Community, EAC. The collapse of the East African Community was formalized in 1977. The dissolution led to economic disruptions as shared institutions and assets had to be divided, and each country began pursuing more independent economic strategies. The breakdown also marked a period of regional tension, especially between Kenya and particularly Tanzania, due to ideological differences and competition for regional influence. 3. Political tensions and succession concerns. By late 1977 and early 1978, there were rising concerns about President Jomo Kenyatta's health. Kenyatta was visibly aging, and his diminishing capacity raised anxieties about the future leadership of the country. The political elite began positioning themselves for the post-Kenyatta era. Though Vice President Daniel Arap Moi was the constitutional successor, some influential Kikuyu politicians were wary of his leadership. 4. Economic challenges, including a downturn in the agricultural sector. Coffee and tea, major exports, experienced price volatility, impacting the rural economy. The country was also dealing with increasing urbanization and the need to manage employment and social services in cities. 5. Growing authoritarianism. The government tightened its control over political discourse and dissent. This included suppression of critical voices within the media and civil society, a trend that would become more pronounced under Moi's rule after 1978.
December 15, 2007 to January 30, 2008. Key events during this time include: General election, December 27, 2007. President Mwai Kibaki of the Party of National Unity sought re-election against his main challenger, Raila Odinga of the Orange Democratic Movement. The campaign period was marked by high tension, with accusations of bias by the Electoral Commission of Kenya and concerns about potential electoral malpractice. 2. Disputed election results. On December 30, 2007, the ECK declared Mwai Kibaki the winner, and he was quickly sworn in for a second term. Raila Odinga and his party claimed the election had been rigged. International and local observers also raised serious concerns about the integrity of the vote counting process, citing irregularities. 3. Post-election violence, December 2007 to February 2008. The announcement of Kibaki's victory triggered an outbreak of violence across the country, largely along ethnic lines, as many communities felt disenfranchised by the results. The unrest quickly escalated into ethnic clashes between communities perceived to support the opposing political sides. The violence involved killings, looting, destruction of property, forced displacement, and instances of sexual violence. It is estimated that over 1,100 people were killed, and more than 600,000 were displaced during this period. 4. Humanitarian and economic impact. The violence had a severe humanitarian impact, with thousands of internally displaced people, IDPs, seeking shelter in camps. The economic repercussions were also severe, as businesses were destroyed, tourism plummeted, and the country's overall economic activity was disrupted. 5. International intervention and mediation. Due to the escalating violence, there was intense pressure from the international community to resolve the crisis. The African Union, the United Nations and various countries intervened diplomatically. Former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan led the mediation efforts through the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation Process, which began in late January 2008. This initiative aimed to broker a peace deal between Kibaki and Odinga and to address the underlying issues that had fueled the violence. 6. Formation of a coalition government, February 2008. The mediation resulted in the signing of the National Accord and Reconciliation Act on February 28, 2008. Kibaki remained as president, and Raila Odinga was appointed as the newly created position of Prime Minister sharing executive power. The coalition government was designed to ensure a power-sharing arrangement and bring an end to the violence, paving the way for constitutional reforms and addressing long-standing grievances. This period highlighted deep-seated ethnic and political divisions in Kenya and led to comprehensive reforms in the political and electoral systems in the years that followed, including the adoption of a new constitution in 2010.